listening to Career Cafe, a podcast for all things career related to help you thrive in the professional world. Welcome today to our podcast episode, Cracking the Code, Mastering the ATS Resume Game. In this episode, we're going to be talking about what ATS is and how to make your resume seen by employers and get through the ATS system. So joining us today, we have Brandon Street and Clara Webster and moderator McKinley Hatch, myself, experts in career and professional development topics. Brandon, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us why you are an expert and why we should listen to what you say about ATS.
Why should listen to it? Well, I'll tell you this, and both Clara and I have, Clara. We were just talking about this right before we came in, that she doesn't like to be called Clara, and then I called her Clara for some reason. But Clara and I have been through a training for ATS systems, and I've had a lot of experience helping people apply through those for over the 20 years I've been helping with career services. So.
Yeah, and I'm Clara, and I'm a career advisor here at the Career Center, working here with Brandon and McKinley. And yeah, just like Brandon said, we've both been trained in how to kind of beat the ATS system and make sure your resume is effective.
Awesome. So now that we know why we should listen to you, I'm just kidding. Tell me what ATS is. We talked about this in our recent episode about how to get your resume seen, right? And we briefly touched, very briefly, on ATS. But tell us what ATS stands for.
Yeah, so ATS stands for Applicant Tracking Systems, and in 2008, I've been working in career services world since 2004, and the recession in 2008, I really saw this come to light. It's not that they didn't exist, but they really came to light after 2008. And the reason is employers were getting, thousands of applicants for one job because of the need for jobs at the time, and the applicant tracking systems, or ATS systems, were developed to help them through that process because, you can imagine the task was for HR managers to have to work through all of these applications. And so these were developed to help them through that process to identify who the top candidates were, to not waste their time, and to interview those top candidates and allowing the system to do the work for them.
Yeah, and ATS systems, they'll kind of create their own little summary of each resume that the computer generates that, then goes to HR recruiters and kind of gives them whether the keywords they're looking for on that resume or not, and just helps them kind of filter through, resumes that are not as competitive and also show them the ones that are competitive.
And hence the reason why it's so important to make sure that your resume is targeted in a way that captures the attention of the applicant tracking system. And so we're going to talk more about that today, but I think you need to be aware that not only is it important to, as we talked about before, customize your resume for employers, but specifically for these application tracking systems to ensure that you're catching its virtual eye. Right?
Yes, so. And then making it to the human eyes.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, Clara, you touched on keywords. Why don't you dive into that a little further for us and why those keywords are important and what do you mean by keywords?
Yeah, well, so with each job posting, you're going to see certain, things in the qualifications or responsibilities that are considered keywords, right? So if they want, a candidate that maybe has experience in a certain area or knows a certain software, they're going to list that in the job ad. And if you happen to match those things, you want to put those same keywords on your resume, right? If they're looking for someone who's proficient in Microsoft Word, for example, and if you're proficient in Microsoft Word, that's a good keyword that you can put in there that the ATS system will catch and go, oh, they meet one of the things that we're looking for in a job candidate. And so that's why, not only for just normal human employers, but also for ATS systems, that's why it's so important to make sure you have those keywords on there. Because if you don't, they're not going to see how you match that job.
And these really are designed and programmed to look for those, right? And so it's important to learn how to, especially in this case, read a job ad, decipher what they're looking for, identify the keywords, and truly they're not hard to identify if you look for them. Again, it's, as you talked about, some of the key softwares. If they use, the qualification section really helps with this. If they want someone with strong communication skills, you probably ought to replicate those communication skills, especially the word communication skills, right? Or the words communication skills in your resume. And so it's important to make sure you learn how to read a job ad, identify those keywords, decipher. Now, what we don't want is you taking exactly what they say and replicating that, right? We want to use what we call reflective language. So taking what they've said and while using the keywords, writing it in a different way that doesn't necessarily reflect exactly what they said.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Exactly. Let's talk about formatting for ATS, like an ATS resume, right? We talked about this briefly in our last one, but I wanted to readdress this. What should a resume look like formatting-wise to get through these ATS, yeah.
Yeah. No, and that's a great question because formatting is can be a huge issue, or can be very helpful in regards to an ATS system. And so, one thing we know is that when you're writing a resume for an application tracking system or applicant tracking system, you need to ensure that your resume is not in columns. I want you to imagine this. This is basically what an applicant tracking system does. It takes your resume, it will copy your whole resume and paste it as if it did in a Word document or a plain text document, right? And the way that your resume translates over is the way an applicant tracking system is going to read that. And so if you have columns, you could already imagine what's going to happen to that when it gets on the plain text document, right? Things may overlap, they may look weird, and it may be difficult to read. I mean, as it's going through there, it may not make any sense, right? And so we really discourage columns. In some cases, we discourage your information being in different types of non-readable fonts and things like that. So you want to kind of keep those plain as well. And in regards to the most common types of fonts that translate from text to text, right? Like your Calibri and Arial, those types of fonts that you can Google search the top 10 resume fonts, and most of those are pretty safe for the applicant tracking systems.
Yeah, and the other thing that you want to avoid with columns is also using things like any kind of graphics or tables, especially like text boxes. Those, they're kind of popular on resumes where, you want the design to look very fancy and nice. But the problem is, when a computer is transferring that over into a plain text document, if you've got any of those, it's going to confuse the computer and it's not going to be able to copy and paste what was either in that text box or in that graphic or whatever it may be into a place where it can read it. And so it'll just mess up the whole resume. And so with that, you want it to be kind of what a lot of people call boring vanilla resumes, where they're just one column, top to bottom. You don't have any pictures or graphics on there. It's just the text, just the important stuff. And those are really going to be your best resumes for ATS systems.
And you want to make sure that your resumes make sense. I mean, again, you're prompting the ATS system, right? And so you don't want to make up or create your own headers that would make no sense, but you're trying to use fun buzzwords, right? Ensure that if you're going to have your section is education, say education, right? Work experience or experience, and then summary and those types of things that make sense to that system. But if you're creating headers that you're trying to have fun with, then they're not going to make any sense to the system. So
keeping it simple is usually the best way to go with these ATS systems. Don't create your own heading titles or combine them or anything like that. Just go with summary, education, experience as your basic ones. If you need to add another, like a volunteer section or like an award section, those types of things the computer will be able to understand, but don't make it too complex, because then you'll run into issues that way.
Yeah, another thing is, I know a lot of people like to use, like, Canva makes really nice looking resumes, right? They look really pretty, but they do not jive well with ATS systems. And so I would just recommend you don't use those types of third-party resume building type of systems, because some of them are not good. And if you want to check it, again, copy and paste it over to a Word document and see what it looks like. But they usually, like, again, a Canva or those other types of programs don't work well with an ATS system.
Yeah, because with those ones, Canva, even if you download a resume as a PDF, most of the time it'll still be considered a JPEG to an ATS system, and so it won't even be able to read it at all. So basically your ATS response is going to be blank if you use a Canva resume, which we definitely want to avoid.
Blank's not good.
Yeah, blank is not good.
Yeah.
And so usually making a resume in Word or like Google Docs, that's the safe way to go about it. And then just downloading either as a PDF, or even some places will accept a Word doc type of file too.
And I think the other important thing we want to point out is job titles, right? Like, you want to ensure that your job titles are straightforward and make sense to an applicant tracking system. As much as we all love the old Subway sandwich artist job title, I do. I mean, that
Do we love it?
I do.
I think
I
it's
mean,
fine.
I would love to have sandwich artist when I was younger on my resume, right? But it doesn't make a lot of sense to an ATS system. It's going to read that, and I don't think it's going to make any connection to how that's in your work history is going to help with this, what it's looking for, right? So.
Yeah, this is all really good information. We wanted to dive more into ATS so our listeners can get a better idea of what they are putting on their resume and the way they're formatting it and the keywords that they're using, and just having a basic understanding of what ATS is, because I, quite frankly, didn't know about it until I was in college. So I think it's very informational to know. So anyway, thanks, listeners, for tuning in to Career Cafe today. We're going to end with a dad joke, of course.
Yeah. So I don't know if you guys know, but I got a job at a bike shop, but I eventually had to quit that job because I was just too tired. So.
Oh,
My gosh.
You're welcome.
see you next week.